We all know that Luke Altmyer is having a fantastic season thus far, 4 games in, but wait till you hear some of these stats. Locked On Illini, let's go.
You are Locked On Illini, your daily podcast on the Illinois Fighting Illini. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Illini. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Simple reminder, you can find us on your favorite audio platform and on YouTube, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Sunny Verma. I cover the Illini for you daily. That's right, every single day. So if you enjoy the content, Illini content, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It sends this show out to other fellow Illini fans, and that continues to help the channel grow. I'm really going to enjoy today's episode. We're going to be talking about Luke Altmyer and the fantastic season he's been having. And I know I've been talking about him all season long, but when I tell you some of the stats that I was looking over, their PFF grades, when it comes to Luke Altmyer, you're really going to see just how good of a season that he's having. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Luke Altmyer, in his first 4 games of the season last year, had 4 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. His first time being a starting college football quarterback. He had some issues, I think more mental than anything else, but actually, more so than anything else, it was the team surrounding him. When you had an offensive line that still hadn't figured itself out quite yet, and a running back room where nobody had really established themselves as the dominant runner. He struggled at the beginning of the year, but really, I feel like after the halfway mark, it seemed like he was kind of coming into his own. Then, of course, the Minnesota game happened. He got hurt on the last drive. John Paddock comes in, scores a game-winning touchdown with the pass to Isaiah Williams, and then we all know the rest of the story. John Paddock throws for 500-plus yards against Indiana and holds on to the job while Luke Altmyer was kind of recovering from a concussion. This year, a lot of the questions that Illinois haters had was in regards to Luke Altmyer. I actually saw some people posting an article where they had Luke Altmyer as something like the 15th best quarterback in the Big Ten, which was ridiculous. I've been a very staunch supporter of Luke Altmyer, as my everydayers here know. I do think the national narrative on Luke was way off, and I couldn't wait for this season to start. And boy, has he kind of vindicated some of the compliments I was giving him, again, all off season long. I'm going to start talking about the Nebraska game first and foremost, just because that was the big game, the biggest game of the season, going up against a very tough Nebraska team in Lincoln, Friday night, national TV. We all know the narrative. Now, again, I'm looking at PFF grades, and if you're not familiar with PFF, basically what you want to be is somewhere in the 60 to 65 range. That's what an average number would look like. Anything higher is, well, the higher, the better. So his Luke Altmyer's PFF grade against Nebraska was 79.9. When he was blitzed against Nebraska, he went 10 for 12 with 83% completion percentage, 139 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 154.5 NFL passer rating. Another thing that boggles my mind is he hit 89.2% of the adjusted passes in a clean pocket. What that kind of tells you is that 9 out of 10 times, if Luke Altmyer has a clean pocket, 9 out of 10 times he's going to throw to a receiver a pass that is on target. That's only behind Dillon Gabriel in the entire college football landscape. Luke Altmyer is not a above average quarterback. Luke Altmyer is a good quarterback. And I think only now is the national narrative starting to follow. And more so than just stats, as I talked about. You see his poise. He's grown comfortable in his own skin. He's not looking over his shoulder. He even took that, quote, demotion last year from John Paddock as a learning experience. There are plenty of articles that had been released talking about how Luke constantly tried to learn from Paddock, what Paddock was doing differently, and he kind of incorporated it into his game this year, and we see it. Now, in poker, there's a saying that in order to win, all you need is a chip and a chair. And to try to move that analogy over to college football, I genuinely think that as long as you have a quarterback and a coach that believes in that quarterback, you have a chance in any sort of game. And that's why I talked about in that preview against the Kansas team, I said that I wanted Luke to step up. All the attention was on Jalen Daniels and how he raced around us last year, and Nebraska beat us pretty thoroughly. So my personal challenge was to Luke Altmyer. And you know what he did? He outperformed Daniels. I did the same thing last week against Dylan Raiola. I was like, hey, Luke, the national attention is going to be on this young 5-star quarterback who has played relatively flawed football this year. I want you to step up and be the better quarterback Friday night. And guess what? He was the better quarterback. I just read off some of his statistics. Luke Altmyer is poised, and he's grown into becoming what I consider one of the 5-6 best quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Honestly, he might be higher. I said 5 or 6 best quarterbacks in the offseason in the Big Ten. If I really had to put a power ranking together, and maybe sometime this week I will, or maybe I'll do that with Big Ten Ted in the next segment, I think he could be even higher than a top 6 quarterback. But a lot of people have already written Illinois off against Penn State Saturday night. The spread, I believe, opened at 18, got as high as 20.5, and I believe right now is settling around 17.5. And for the same reason that I'm giving Illinois a chance last week when they were underdogs against Nebraska, they finished as a 9-point underdog. I think more credit needs to be given to Illinois this upcoming Saturday. 17.5 is a lot of points. We all remember Luke Altmyer the last time he played Penn State. We remember because that's when the national narrative was essentially written about him. He had 4 interceptions in the first half of that game and eventually got benched. What people who weren't following the Illini didn't realize is that he turned his season around after that game. In his last 6 starts, he had 10 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. And as I mentioned, this year, he's got 10 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. He's not only making plays, but he's not giving the ball away. We know that Penn State defensive line is beastly. I mean, I believe they injured 2 of Kent State's quarterbacks just this past week. But our offensive line stood up to the task last week against Nebraska. And who knows what happens this Saturday. But with the way this season is going, are you telling me it's out of the possibility that Luke Altmyer, who again has stepped up every step of the way this season, can possibly have his redemption game against Penn State on Saturday? Am I out of line in thinking that? I just know that I was one of his biggest supporters last year, and through this offseason, I believe in his talent, and I know the coaching staff believes in his talent, and I think Saturday could be a big step for the nation to recognize his talent as well. Five-Hour Energy fixes tired fast. Whether you have a long list to do for work or a list of DIY projects to tackle at home, take a 5-Hour Energy shot so you can check everything off your list. If you're like me, you always have a large list of projects for the home. When you get your supplies for your project, do not forget the most essential supply, which is a 5-hour energy shot. With zero sugar and a convenient portable size, it's a perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5-Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropical burst, grape, berry, and more. There's a flavor for everyone. Try them all. On the site, you even have the option to build your own 12 or 24 pack. You choose the flavor and get it delivered directly to your house. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy product today, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only available until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. 5hourenergy.com today. All right, welcome back. It's Tuesday, so of course I'm bringing on my friend Ted from the Big Ten Ted YouTube channel. Ted, thank you again for coming on today.
Yeah, it's good to be here. It's good to be here, and in the presence of optimism, certainly. A big win on Friday night from Illinois, and I said it on the channel, on the podcast. This is a team that's looking pretty good right now. First 4-0 start, I believe, since 2011 for the Orange and Blue right now. So things are certainly looking up, and I can certainly sense the positivity. It is a very positive year within the show right now. So I'm excited to talk some football.
So funny thing, Ted, is in the opening segment of this episode, I talked a little bit about Luke Altmyer and just how good of a quarterback he's essentially become. Yeah. And as soon as I finished recording that first segment, a tweet came out and Luke Altmyer was announced as the Big Ten Offensive Co-Player of the Week. So, of course, I wish I mentioned that in the first segment, but that's how content happens sometimes, right? But I'm just curious, Ted, before we get started onto last week's games and preview the Week 5 games, I've always said throughout the offseason that I genuinely felt like Luke Altmyer was a top 5, top 6 quarterback in the conference. And I didn't think that was exactly a controversial take, but, you had one guy at 24/7. I think he put Altmyer as the 15th best quarterback in the conference over the offseason, which just completely astounded me. So let me ask you, Mr. Big Ten aficionado, where would you put Luke Altmyer? Maybe, based on his play this year.
Boy, that's a little bit of a tough one, because there's been some quarterbacks you feel pretty I'm going to throw out Will Howard at Ohio State. I think he's played pretty well, but he hasn't played anybody. Right. And I know this is you haven't played anybody season, right? I know Indiana is kind of as a team is going through that right about now, but I certainly don't disagree with that top 5 or 6. Really, when you're listing off quarterbacks, I think guys that you certainly got to have in that conversation, look at Dylan Gabriel, even in those first 2 games where Oregon was maybe struggling a little bit for their standards, he was still playing pretty good football, especially in that second game against Boise State. And then look at that game against Oregon State, where it just took a lot for him to throw an incomplete pass. Right. Drew Aller is maybe another one that you got to throw in there. I think he's certainly improved, but kind of like Will Howard, we're going to find out a lot about him, I think, this weekend, and we're going to be talking about that here in just a little bit. But I think he's playing better, certainly in this system with Andy Kotelnicki in there as well. Miller Moss, of course, at USC in what he's been able to do so far. And then I think that's where you get into your Will Rogers and your Luke Altmyers. I certainly think that's kind of where I view him. Maybe within that, depending on who you are and where exactly you slot him, maybe that 4 to 6, because I feel pretty strongly about the Gabriels and the Allers. I think Will Howard is just going to be good just because he has elite talent to throw to and play with, right? You got an elite play caller in Chip Kelly. But I certainly view Luke Altmyer as in that top group, that top 5 or top 6 group, because, man, he has just played so efficient, and it certainly shouldn't be ultra surprising coming out of high school. 4-star kid, top 150, 200 type of kid in the country. He always had talent. He always had arm talent. It was just kind of combining him with the right weapons on the outside and the right coordinator. And boy, do they have that combination this season at Illinois.
And that combination worked wonders last Friday night against Nebraska. Now, Ted, again, I on this show, I've already talked ad nauseum about what I thought about that game between the Illini and Nebraska. So now I hand over the floor to you as a guy who watches without a bias. What did you think of that game?
You know, you talked about Luke Altmyer, him being very impressive. Pat Bryant, ho-hum, another fantastic performance from him. Like, I want to first talk about Pat Bryant, right? Because I just love how well he's playing right now. I just love this kid. Because Tommy Hill went out later on in this game. Let's not forget, early on in this game, Illinois' first touchdown, Pat Bryant puts a double move on Tommy Hill, and he smokes him. You know, let's call it as it is. And he's very open for a touchdown. So Pat Bryant is, I think, really helps this thing kind of go. We'll see what the injury status of Zachary Franklin is going forward. But I think one of the big takeaways I have is Barry Lunny Jr., man. He is coming into his own as one of the Big Ten's best coordinators and one of the Big Ten's best play callers. When they got down by the goal line, this guy was ultra creative in what he was able to do, getting big. Henderson, forgot his first name, Henderson, the big tight end right there, big old 94, getting him involved, usually maybe being brought in as an extra blocker, but he gets him out on a pass route, putting his foot into the ground and doing some good things there. And then in overtime, lining up Pat Bryant as a fullback. I mean, at that point, I'm just like, I was just like, Barry, whatever you want to do, I'm going to agree with, right? There is certainly no doubt with what he was play calling. And as this game was going along, it seemed like he was always one step ahead of Tony White. And there was that turnover where I think Tony White brought a blitz from the backside of Altmyer where they forced that later in the game. But other than that, I always thought Barry was just one step ahead. The pass game was going early, and then they got the run game going a little bit more in the second half. And Nebraska defensively seemed to be playing catch up. I think for a lot of this football game as well. And then I think another takeaway, and this really goes with the season in general, there's, I think, a lot more depth in this running back room, I think, than we anticipated, right? I think you and I talked about this preseason. Yeah, Caden Fagan could be a 1,000-yard back, bell cow, 10 touchdowns, whatever, right? That type of guy. But now I think you're seeing so much more depth. You're seeing Josh McCray really step up. You're seeing Aiden Lawfrey, Khalil Valentine, the freshman, has really stepped up, and he's got a bigger role. And I just think that adds to what Illinois wants to do. It keeps Caden Fagan fresh for later in the season, because we know last year he went out with an injury. Okay, and now being able to rotate him in and out, maybe he won't have those gaudy numbers at the end of the year. But once you get to those games in November where you are going to need him and you're going to need to lean on him, you're going to be thankful that you had this depth in September. So, and then the defense, okay? I think this defense just continues to get better and better. The secondary, the windows throwing the football shrunk as we got into the second half. And it is, they just get smaller and smaller and smaller. And credit to Dylan Raiola. At times, he was able to complete some of those passes. But man, that secondary is really, really good, right? We take a look at that defense a couple of years back. It was the secondary that was really good that year that led Illinois to an 8-4 season. And now you factor in with a good linebacking group. And I think that defensive line is ahead of schedule as well. It's just a well-balanced, and we know Brett Bielema is going to have an extremely well-coached team. He's going to coach these guys up extremely well. So it was so fun to be able to see that and being them come out on top against Nebraska, who I think is still very good. And these are two really good programs that could both win 8, 9. Who knows maybe how many games that they could win at the end of the year.
Yeah, I look at this game as we talked about this last week. All the attention and focus was on Nebraska being the 3-0 team coming in, and very little attention from the Illini side. But I think that victory, and again, it wasn't a lucky victory. It was just a good football team, good football team beating another good football team that has kind of gotten people starting to notice the Illini. And, now obviously even NBC has moved this matchup against Penn State to pretty much the primetime spot at 6:30. So that should be a great game. But the Illini and Nebraska wasn't the only good game of last weekend. I feel like we had a great weekend of Big Ten football.
Oh, absolutely. We did. Of course, you got to start to talk about, when you had that Illinois-Nebraska overtime type of game. How about USC and Michigan, of course, was the premier game coming into the weekend. And can we just start by saying the first 30 seconds to 40 seconds of this broadcast is peak college football, with CBS, of course, being part of the Big Ten package and the stripe out and just the traditional uniforms of Michigan and USC. It was just amazing. It was college football sensory overload to really start this thing and it kind of reminded me, and as this game kind of went on, this reminded me of an old school Rose Bowl. Right. And you had USC, who has this tradition of great quarterbacks and great receivers and great offensive play, and Michigan, who has the tradition over many decades of being the physical type of football team. It reminded me of that clash of styles that we would always see on New Year's Day for all those years. But what a big win for Michigan. What a big response. There was a potential for USC to really come in there and set the tone and confirm themselves maybe as a Big Ten title contender, and maybe for Michigan to have their second loss, and a lot of big time questions. But man, you may call them one-dimensional, but they do the one dimension pretty darn good. Now, I want to say that, and then their defense really stepped it up, right? Especially those guys up front. Josiah Stewart was next to unblockable at some points during that game. Now, I want to give some credit to USC because this was a 14-3 game at half. Lincoln Riley teams maybe of the past wouldn't have been able to really come back the way they did. I was impressed with the resolve of the Trojans in this particular football game, especially when they came out in the second half. And then when Will Johnson had that pick six, they came back again in this big game. And I thought they made some really good adjustments defensively. I mentioned the offensive line swap at tackles that they were able to make. So USC is certainly, they're still a top 15 team. This is still a team that I think is going to be really, really good. Like we said about Nebraska and Illinois, it's just two good teams playing two good teams. I know naturally we want to say, well, this team, made a statement and they're going to jump up here, and the team that lost, they got big time problems. I know that's naturally what we want to do, but in these two matchups, I don't think you can really say that. So, but yeah, that was certainly the big game of the weekend, and a big win for Michigan. And now they're sitting there at 3-1. And if they can really perfect this style of play, even when they play teams like Oregon and Ohio State, I think it's going to be tough, right, for teams to play that kind of a Michigan team.
Where do you put Michigan? For me, it's like, yeah, they're very good at what they do, but that might beat teams like a USC or the tier right below. But do you think they can get to 10 to 11 wins without having any semblance of a passing game?
So 10 wins would require them beating one of Oregon and Ohio State, and I just don't see that happening. All right? I just don't see that happening right now. I think those teams, of course, they're at the top of the group, right? Those teams are all the way up there. But you look at some of these other teams. We know we got Illinois and Indiana on the schedule. I feel like they can drag those teams into a phone booth, and they can be pretty successful doing that. Yeah, once you get to those higher level teams, I think that this could get exposed a little bit. But I think Sharon Moore is making the best out of not the greatest situation, right? That kind of Jim Harbaugh and these people left for him. And I think a lot of credit should be directed in the direction of Sharon Moore. If this thing ends up something like 9-3, if they win every other game other than Oregon and Ohio State the rest of the way, I think he deserves a lot of credit, right? Because this was I know they got some really good personnel on defense, but especially offensively, right? I think he's just trying to figure this thing out. What's going to work? And if this is what's going to work going forward, I think you got to give him a lot of credit down the stretch. But right now, I cannot have Michigan be a college football playoff team. I just don't think that. I think they're a notch below a playoff team, right? Maybe somewhere between 13 and 20, somewhere in college football. That seems to me, because I think they got a lot of things. I don't want to say quite perfected because we're still early in the season, but if they can continue what we saw them do against USC on defense and specifically the run game, that's going to give some teams problems, right? Because when bigger teams have played service academies in the past, now I know this isn't a triple option flex bone type of offense, but when you're that heavy run, it can give some teams problems because it's not something you see every day, right? You game plan against the run and you game plan against the pass and maybe a little bit more balanced offenses. So it certainly creates something a lot different for Michigan. But if they can perfect that, I think they should be able to win a good amount of football games going forward. So yeah, I know they're kind of a tough team to peg exactly where they land, but yeah, I just don't think that they're going to be in a Big Ten championship or a college football playoff conversation.
A team that is going to be involved in potential Big Ten championship talk and college football playoff talk will be matching up against the Illini on Saturday night. So right after this, we'll get Ted's opinion on how that game might go. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Ted. National television, NBC, Big Ten, game of the week, Illinois against Penn State. The unofficial whiteout, as James Franklin is pleading for. Let me know what your thoughts on the game is. Like, this could be a statement game, I feel like, for both teams.
Absolutely, it could. I think this is really the first game for Penn State this season. I know West Virginia was out there and they took care of business against the Mountaineers, but this is a ranked team. And this is a team I think that, I mean, of course, you and I, right, agree with this. And I think a lot of people now are coming around to the fact that, yeah, Illinois is a pretty good football team. I think we're going to learn a lot about both teams, right? You mentioned the atmosphere. You mentioned what James Franklin wants for this particular matchup. How does a Brett Bielema Illinois team go into that environment? And how do they react in that type of environment, right? It tells you a lot about where this team is and how they can compete with some of the bigger and better environments and teams, right? Penn State, of course, is a top 10 type of team right now. And then when you look at the Nittany Lions, remember a couple of weeks ago, that game against Bowling Green where they moved the ball up and down through the air against this Penn State pass defense? Do the Nittany Lions have things figured out in the secondary? Because weren't we just talking about Luke Altmyer being the top 5 or 6 quarterback? Okay, because if this passing game can get going against Penn State and maybe some of those issues are still there like they were against Bowling Green, I think this is an Illinois team that can hang around. I think this is an Illinois team that can hang around regardless. And I'm very curious to see this battle between Tom Allen on the defensive side and Barry Lunny Jr. On the offensive side of the football as well. I'm curious to see how aggressive the pass rush is going to be for Penn State in this game. Will the tackles be able to contain Abdul Carter and Dan Sutton on the outside? Like, you look at their numbers, and they're a little bit underwhelming throughout their first couple of games. They haven't gotten home as much with pressure, and we were expecting these guys to just be absolute menaces coming off the edge. So can they get pressure on Luke Altmyer? I think they're going to have to get pressure on Luke Altmyer because we've seen if he can stand back there and has time to throw the football, he can dissect the defense. And then, like we said before, we saw the issues with the Penn State secondary. So I think that's the opening for Illinois that they need to try to exploit in this particular football game. Penn State, I think the key for them is establish a strong running game right off the bat. I think you've seen a lot of parts about this Nittany Lion offense be so much better. I think this run game is better because Andy Kotelnicki and company have made this throw game better. And I think Drew Aller is playing with a lot more confidence in this particular offense as well. So I'm excited to see if Penn State is a team that is that type of Big Ten championship contender. I think now the way things have shaken out through 4 weeks, I believe Ohio State and Oregon are still those teams at the very top. You know, Michigan, of course, even after their big win over USC, has fallen off a little bit. USC, a tough loss to Michigan. We don't quite know where they're at, right? USC a little bit later on plays Penn State at the Coliseum. Okay, USC was kind of teetering on, can they be a Big Ten championship dark horse or type of contender? But now Penn State has the opportunity to prove to everybody, if they can come out strong and they have a convincing win over Illinois, I think that will convince a lot of people that they can certainly be in this race. But if Illinois can be competitive, who knows, maybe even win the football game at Penn State. Nobody gave them a chance in that atmosphere against Nebraska, myself included, right? And nobody's going to really give them much of a chance going into this quasi-whiteout against Penn State. It's going to be the same recycled type of stuff. right? Great defense, environment, right? Coaching, whatever it is, even though Brett Bielema, of course, has done a pretty good job coaching this team. But you kind of know what we heard last week, and I think you're going to hear a lot of that this week. If Illinois plays Penn State close, I think you got to really slap some respect, even more respect on that Illinois team than where they're at right now. So this should be a really fun matchup. I don't think this one's going to be a blowout. I think Illinois can hang around against Penn State, but we'll see exactly how far they are apart after Saturday night.
Yeah, I think the initial 17.5 point spread was an interesting one. Wow. In Penn State's favor. How it moves is what I'm also interested in seeing. The Nebraska one opened at 8.5, got up to 10, got as low as 5.5, I believe, and then closed at 9. So there was a lot of movement on that one. I'm looking forward to seeing where the sharps kind of move this line. Another game I kind of had my eye on this particular week, Ted, was the Wisconsin game. Obviously, they lost their starting quarterback a couple weeks ago, but they've had a bye week now to kind of really get used to and accustomed to Braden Locke. And they've got a big game against USC. So I'm curious on your thoughts of that game.
Yeah, so let's talk about it from the Wisconsin point of view first. I think this week is really going to tell us a lot about where Phil Longo is taking this team, because I think that they've constructed their team. They've built this team around the skill set that Tyler Van Dyke can certainly provide. And now you got to go, look, Wisconsin and the people around this Wisconsin program, they like Braden Locke for the future. Okay. He, as a redshirt freshman last year, I think he provided some flashes of brilliance at time. Of course, he looked like a young quarterback for a lot of the time, certainly as well. But Phil Longo has to have him ready to play. 2 weeks to prepare for this USC game, 2 weeks to really get him involved as QB1 in this offense. Look, the thoughts around Phil Longo in this program, I feel like when I talk about him, I'm putting it kindly, because there are some people that if he can't get it figured out in the next couple of games, there's a chance that he could be a goner, right? If they come out and Wisconsin is flat and they just get completely run off the field by USC, maybe not quite as much like it did against Alabama, but in similar-ish type of fashion, I think that's going to be an indictment about where Phil Longo has this team and has this program offensively, certainly right now. Then you look at it from USC's point of view. This is a team that has championship type of aspirations. And I think that they might come out, they might be playing a little bit angry after that loss to the Michigan Wolverines right now. And I think USC, just talent-wise, is multiple rungs on the ladder above where the Wisconsin Badgers are right now. And then they got a guy across the sideline by the name of Alex Grinch, right? That maybe was the Grinch that stole success the last couple of years when he was the defensive coordinator in Los Angeles. So maybe a little bit of extra motivation there that says, hey, we're in a great spot. And, maybe the squad that you're on isn't in as such of a great spot right now. So, when I look at this game, can Wisconsin get this run game going? Tawi Walker, can they get him going? Chez Malusi, right? Can they get him going? Cade Yakimelli has really stepped up, because I think they're going to need to get the run game going to support Braden Locke. If you expect Braden Locke to really step in and to do TVD type of things, I think that you could run into problems. So I think Wisconsin needs to adjust. I think that they need to be able to run the football. You look at what USC did in the second half against Michigan, and they played the run a lot better. I think there's just so much in this game that favors USC, but there's maybe some other factors that certainly play into this. Well, all of a sudden, if we see Braden come out and play well, and he's maybe the quarterback that of the future, and maybe the future is now, maybe this game could be a little bit closer than people thought.
Always learning from Big Ten. Ted, let the crowd know what's going on your channel right now.
Going to be previewing some games, the ones we talked about today, Penn State and Illinois, Wisconsin and USC, certainly throughout the week as well. And then on Friday, I will be making my picks, not only straight up, but you see how some of the picks that I have, some over-unders and spreads as well. So that's going to be every Friday as well. And then going to have some coverage On Saturday, we got Minnesota and Michigan in the big noon slot. We'll see if the Wolverines can keep it going as well. Good Friday night game, Washington and Rutgers. So we're going to have coverage of that here throughout the week as well. So it should be another fun week. Maybe it's not the biggest and baddest matchup, but maybe a couple of weeks ago we said that. We thought we might get some upsets. Who knows? Maybe we'll get some upsets this week. And then everything I said about the Big Ten this week, we're going to have to throw it out and come up with something new to talk about, right? Because everything's changing just week by week. It's so fun.
All right, Ted. We'll see you next week.
All right. Sounds good.
And that just about wraps it up for this edition of Locked On Illini. Please, again, on your way out, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We're going to be having Penn State content for you all week. We're also going to be talking a little Illini basketball in the coming days. Make sure you won't miss an episode. Hit that notification button, and I'll see you tomorrow. ILL. Love you guys.